Hello. So, I've decided to make a tier list ranking every single card in Clash Royale. So this is all just my opinion. If you disagree with me, put in the comments, but I'm just going to be making just my opinion on all the cards in the game. So we'll start with the Elite Barbarians. These are pretty good right now especially, so I think I'll put them in the A tier. They're buffed and, yeah, they're pretty good. Archers are pretty mediocre. I mean, they're not particularly that useful. They're probably pretty average, I'd say. I was going C tier. Baby Dragon's a card that I used to use a lot, but I just don't think it deals enough damage. At level 13 only does 193, so I would say that's probably belongs in the D tier in my opinion. So the Bandits, this one's pretty alright because it can stop a charging prince without taking any damage, which is pretty cool, and it's a pretty alright card. I'll put an A tier too. Barbarian Hut, like the rest of the spawners in the game, they aren't doing so great right now, so I'd say that probably goes in the F tier. I hardly see it get used. Regular Barbarians, I mean, they're pretty good actually, but they're easily countered. But I'd say they could probably go into the B. I'd say. Barbarian Barrel, this card's pretty good, so I'd say it's probably a good A tier. A better A tier. Bats, I think that the bats are okay. They can go in the B tier. Bats, B for bats, whatever. Healer, this is a card I don't really see get used very much at all. Honestly, it really ain't that great. I'd say it's probably like a, lower D tier. I'd say. This card right here, I'd say it's pretty okay, I guess. I'd probably just put in C. Dark Goblin's pretty good. Fast rate of fire goes in B. Bomber, yeah, it's a pretty alright card. I mean, it probably goes in B tier. Bomber Tower, this card's weakness is that it can't attack air troops, and they also recently nerfed its death damage, which, believe me, we'll get to more on that later. But I'd say it's probably a D tier. You don't really see it used very much. I mean, it's okay, but Bowler, again, not particularly high usage rate, so probably I'd say it's D tier. Elixir Collector, this is a card that I gotta admit it ain't so great. I haven't seen anybody use it for a while, so of course I'm going on more than just usage, like the amount of times I see it get used, but I'd say it's probably a pretty good E tier. I mean, it's not quite F, but so it's E. Frontal Tower is a great card. It can counter many things easily, so it goes in A tier. Mortar is probably pretty, I'd say it's probably like a lower D tier. Tesla, it's probably a B tier, good for countering things. Expo will probably go next to the Mortar. Cannon Cart is probably, I'd say it probably goes into the E tier maybe. It's probably a better E tier, but yeah. Cannon, this card's only good in one deck, but I'll probably put in the E tier. I wouldn't say it's quite F, but Balloon, it's pretty good. It's always been good. Of course, they recently nerfed its death damage, but I'd say it could probably go into the probably a pretty good B tier, probably an upper B tier card. Golem, yeah, I'd say it's alright. It's probably like a probably a lower B tier. The Witch, which it's alright, but it's not so strong. I'd say it's probably like D tier. Clone Spell. It's probably E tier. It's really not that great. It's lower E tier. I wouldn't say it's quite F though. Dark Prince, I'd say that's probably B tier. Night Witch, I'd say is probably like a C tier. Earthquakes, that's pretty decent. I'd say it's probably, pretty B tier. Electro Dragon is pretty meh, I guess. I mean, it's alright, but I'd say it's pretty good D tier. Oh, this guy. Now, this guy here I've lost to many times. Very hard to stop, does an insane amount of damage to all your troops. I'd say this card, right now, as of May 19th, I'd say that this card might even be up towards maybe even the S tier, honestly, because this card, it's pretty hard to counter, so yeah. Electro Spirit, I'd say it's probably, I'd say it's probably B tier, or C, or probably B. Ooh. Electro Wizard, this one's pretty good. I'd say it's like a yeah, it's a hard one. I'd say it probably is pretty S tier though. Oh boy, this one. Elixir Golem. This is a card I can't really figure out. Why the hell would anybody ever want to give their opponent 4 Elixir? I don't know, I just don't get it. Like, it seems to have an okay use rate for what it is, but it's like why? Like, when somebody drops this down, I just laugh at them. I don't know, I'd say that this card is probably, I know some people are going to disagree with me, but I'm putting an F tier because it's like, there have been times where I defeat one and I get such elixir advantage, I just destroy my opponent. It's like, why would you do that to yourself? I thought that the idea of playing this game was to win, not to help your opponent. But yeah, I don't know. I just don't understand it. Like, why the hell would anybody ever want to drop this down? Executioner, this is a card that I remember being good, but apparently it's not so great anymore. But I'd say it's probably, it probably goes into the probably like maybe a lower C tier, maybe. This card right here, I think it's called a Firecracker. It's pretty okay. It's kind of annoying to hit sometimes because it has that pushback effect. I think it's pretty good B tier. Ooh, Fireball. No, this one's S for sure. Awesome card. Goblin Hut, receive that 35% health nerf, which makes it not doing so great, so I'd say it's probably in the E tier, because I personally use this card a lot. Furnace is probably worse than the Goblin Hut. I'm putting in F. Fire Spirits they're pretty weak, but I'd say that they're not quite F, so I'm just gonna put them in E. Okay. Fisherman, that's pretty good. That's probably A tier. Flying Machine is probably pretty E tier, I'd say. Low hit points, so yeah, it's not so great. Freeze is probably a good B tier. It's pretty annoying sometimes. Ghost, I'd say Ghost is pretty fair B tier. Giant, this is a card that probably could use a slight buff, but I'd probably put in the D tier, Okay. Giant Skeleton. What the fuck did they do to this card back in March? They literally fucking killed it, and it's already dead, so that's a pretty good statement right there. I cannot fucking believe, I literally, vomited all over myself when I saw its fucking death damage. 54% reduction in death damage. Are you fucking kidding me? Whose idea was it to do that? Its bomb doesn't kill anything. It is literally fucking worthless. It might actually be the worst card in the game right now, honestly. Which is sad, because, to be honest with you, this was my favorite card in the whole entire game. I loved it. But now it's unfucking usable. It doesn't work anymore. It's going in F. before the massive nerf to its death damage, it probably would have been in C tier, but now it's literally like the worst card in the entire game. It needs an emergency buff. They need to reverse what they did. Level 13 should do 1,389 damage. It does 644. It's terrible, like what they did. What they did to it. Like the worst nerf ever. It wasn't even popular to begin with, so I don't know what the fuck they were thinking. But yeah, this card needs a huge buff, like now. Oh man. Okay, Spear Goblins, I'd say they're pretty B tier, they're alright. Goblin Barrel is probably, it's easy to counter, but I'd say it's probably a lower B tier. Goblin Cage is probably pretty B tier. It's good for countering things like the Hog Rider, but, other than that, purely defense, but yeah. Goblin Gain is probably more like it's pretty, actually A tier, it's pretty good. Goblin Giant is probably pretty E tier, I'd say. It's not that great. Just the regular goblins, they aren't that great. They don't have a very high use rate. You might as well just use a Goblin Gain, but I'd say they're probably a lower D tier. Graveyard's probably pretty D tier. It's not, I don't think it's that great. It can be good, but usually not. Heal Spirit's probably pretty E tier. I'd say even a lower E tier at that. Almost F, but not quite. But yeah, it's not that good. Hog Rider, I'd say Hog Rider's probably a pretty upper B tier. It's pretty good. Hunter, I'd say Hunter's probably like, I'd say it's probably a lower C tier. Ice Golem's probably a B tier, I'd say. Ice Wizard, this one's pretty good. I'd say it's probably in the A tier. Higher upper A tier. Throne Dragon, again, pretty good, A tier. Knight, I'd say, is pretty good. You get a lot of hit points for 3 elixirs, so I'd say Knight is pretty upper B tier. Lava Hound, I'd say, is probably say lower C tier. Lightning is pretty B tier. Yeah, it's alright. Magic Archer, I'd say that's probably like an upper A tier. This guy, Mega Knight, I'd say it's probably pretty B tier, Pretty alright. Yeah. Mega Minion, this one's pretty good. I'd say it's probably A tier. Miner, I'd say it's probably A tier. It's pretty good. Minions. This is a card that's pretty high risk, high reward. I'd say it probably goes into the lower D tier. Regular minions can probably go into the B tier. Mini P.E.K.K.A., I think this one's pretty alright. I'd say it's probably pretty B tier. The Mirror card. This is a card that I think is a pretty cool card. It's cool being able to have level 14 troops, but it's not very practical, so I'd say it's probably I'll give it this. It's a better F tier. Okay. Mother Witch, I'd say this one here is probably pretty A tier, honestly. It's pretty good. Musketeer is probably pretty C tier. It's okay, pretty average. Arrows, probably pretty A tier card, P.E.K.K.A. Now this one here is another high risk, high reward. It's like, it does a lot of damage, but at the same time it's countered very easily. So I'd say it's pretty C tier, pretty average. Poison. One's probably pretty A tier, pretty good. Prince, one here I'd probably put with the mini P.E.K.K.A, you know. Strong but countered easily. Princess, this one here is probably a pretty good A tier. Lumberjack, you know, this one here is A tier. I love this card. Rage, I use this card a lot, but I'm gonna have to say it's pretty E tier, I'd say. Or actually, maybe it's D tier. It's a better E tier, I'll say that. Ram Rider is pretty okay, you know, I'd say it's probably B tier. Rascals, I'd say, are pretty dang C tier. Rocket is pretty C tier. Of course, it does a lot of damage, but only hits a tiny area and it has a high cost, so it's not, you know, above average, I'd say. Royal Delivery is pretty, say that that's pretty C tier, you know, it's pretty alright, it's okay. Royal Giant, this is probably in the A tier, because, you know, it does pretty good damage to your tower. I mean, Royal Hogs, I mean, probably pretty C, probably actually maybe more like B tier. Royal Recruits, you know, these ones, not really that great. I'm gonna put them in E tier. Don't see them very often, you know. Skeleton Barrel, now this card's just friggin' annoying. I'd say it's probably in the A tier. Skeleton Dragons, these cards don't seem to be all that great, so I'm just gonna put them in like probably like the E tier. Skeleton Army, I'd say that's probably B tier. Easily countered, lots of damage, yeah. One Elixir Skeletons, this card here can get you some pretty good elixir trades, so we're going to put in A tier. It's pretty good. Guards. This is a card with a very low use rate, and it really isn't that good of a card. I mean, of course they have shields, but you know, they're not that great. I'd say that they're probably a lower E tier. You know, not that good. Giant Snowball is probably in the B tier. You know, it's alright. S-Spirit's probably pretty A tier, I'd say. The Log, here's another S tier. Great card. Three Musketeers, this is a card that probably, in my opinion, probably could go in the D tier. It's very high risk, high reward, but, you know, it's pretty risky. Graveyard probably goes in the E tier, I'd say. You know. Tornado, this card here probably goes in the A tier, probably better A tier. Valkyrie, this card right here, high hit points, damage all around. I'd say this card here is probably pretty A tier. Probably lower A tier, upper B tier. I'm just gonna put in the A tier. Wall Breakers, this is another one of those cards, kind of like the Goblin Barrel. It's like, it's hard to get them to do damage, but when they do, it's really good. I'm just going to put them in the same tier as Goblin Barrel, because that only makes sense. Wizard, this is a card that I'm probably going to put one lower than the Executioner, because they both do, they're both similar, but the Executioner is better, so I'm just going to put it in D tier. Sparky, I'd say, is probably, I don't know, I'd say it's probably an upper D tier. I mean, when up against an Electro Wizard, it's worthless, but, and electricity in general, but it can be good. But Zappies, oh yeah, and this card too, but Zappies probably could go in the B tier, I'd say. Alright. And Zap is probably a pretty S tier card. Okay, so that's the whole list. So yeah, right now, Electro Giant is very, you know, definitely kills your troops if you try and counter. It's pretty good. Yeah, they really need to rebuff the giant skeleton, but that's my tier list, so like if you enjoy, so yeah, bye.